Hello, everyone. Can someone just chat and see if it's working out? I don't understand why. The video just stopped. I was talking, it was working. So let me just make sure it's working. I think it has something to do with having a lot of storms in this area, and I think it must have dropped right at the beginning. So let me just have a look and see what's going on here. Can someone talk and chat and let me know? Just say hey or whatever, you can hear me. So I had started talking. I'm just going to assume that none of it, that you didn't hear any of it because it was going and then it cut out and I didn't know it wasn't going. So whatever, it's fine. So the point is, sorry, I'm watching chat at the same time. So the point tonight of what we're going to talk about is dilution of power. It's how that applies to lateralism. One of the major concepts in lateralism is that you don't want any concentrated power anywhere you can avoid it. Our founding fathers believed in the same principle, which is why we are going to talk about actually the difference between a republic and a democracy, in America. Right, so I'm still not, hang on a second, I'm still not getting people saying it's still not working. Hang on a second. Get this working. Let me share this. Let's see what. I'm just gonna try to get us working here. I don't know what's going on in this area. Right. Okay. So where were we at? So we were talking about the way that dilution of power is set up in our government. And what you do is you split up into different departments. And so that's why we have local, state, federal, different government. That's all comes back to our original founding fathers, and that's what they wanted. But what becomes a question in America is, are we a republic? Are we a democracy? What are we? And then the other question is if we're going to talk about lateralism, why does it matter? Well, one thing I didn't say in the first episode is that lateralism is more of an ideology than just like a set of, this is the way you work a government. So I have a lot of ideas, and they each concern a different subject. In the end, when you go through it all, you form a kind of a concept of how you want government to work. And it's not like, I would want the Constitution replaced and sort of a lateralism constitution put in its stead. I mean, I could write one and it would be cool, but it's not really the goal. I mean, the Constitution is actually fine. If in America, if people would actually obey our laws, then we wouldn't have any problems. But we don't obey our laws, and we're going to talk about that. And the main problem we have is the Supreme Court, which is kind of timely, which is why I wanted to do this session tonight, because we're having the hearings and there's so much being said. So the first thing we're talking about is republic. Or actually, no, we'll say what's a democracy first. And so a democracy is when the people have direct influence to the government. You can come in, you take votes directly, and everything's done according to the will of however many people show up and participate. And a democracy is probably the worst kind of government on earth. Once you actually know what it is, it always descends into anarchy. Always, it's inevitable, and there's a reason for that. Democracy has been called by most scholars tyranny of the many, and basically what it means is, like, say you live on a street and there's 100 people there, and your little street is an actual democracy. It's a little township. And say, I don't know, 70 people all pretty much look the same and do the same thing. So they hold the majority, right? Say they don't like redheaded people, and you move into that neighborhood and you're redheaded. Every time they vote for something, they're going to vote against redheads. And there's nothing you can do about it, right? Because you don't have enough other redheads to help you. And that's democracy in a nutshell. That's what's wrong with it, is that the minority always loses in a democracy. It's inevitable. There's nothing you can do about it. There's no recourse. And the reason why democracy always ascends into anarchy is because the longer the majority holds the power, the more they run off minorities and attract people of like mind until it gets to the point where society functions in the way they want, so they don't need the government doing anything. And then it becomes a conflict of will or interest between individuals. And there's no way to mediate it because it's a democracy. All right. So what you wind up with is people arguing, no way to resolve it, which leads to long-term conflicts, and the government falls apart. It happens always with democracy. Our founding fathers knew that. Even back to the nation states, they knew that. This is something that's not a surprise. But it led Plato, and this leads us to our next thing, is the republics. It led Plato, which was a philosopher in Greece, to write the book Republic, which is where, we get our origins of the first attempts at a republic form of government. And we see Plato's style of republic played out best, not in Greece, but in Rome. And so what happened in Rome was they had one single government where they met with a Caesar, as we all know, at the head of it. But the senators, they didn't they were, the function of them was to represent sort of whatever religions were in society, whatever different factions of people. But that's not really the way it played out. It really came down to ties of money and land ownership. And so the original republics, as we think of them, don't function the way our republic works, and they weren't intended to. The Romans had no respect for property rights beyond citizens, and not just anyone could be a citizen. It was something you had to gain. They embraced slavery, and they didn't have any real protections for slaves at all. So what they wound up with was another form of rule by tyranny of the many, even though they were a republic. And so during the Great Enlightenment, which is a period where a lot of white Anglo people, Protestants, and different, they were great thinkers, philosophers, and different things. John Locke, Hume. There's a lot of them. They came down and they got together. They had open conversations. They formed wrote papers and formed a concept, an ideology of how to form a government. Kind of what I've done by myself with lateralism. And they decided that a republic should not be just one individual nationalized government. A federal government is it should be broken up. And this is where the concept of dilution of power comes from in lateralism. They believed it should be broken up and divided into a lot of different parts. That way, even if a majority gained control, it would still be regulated into individual pieces, and a person could move within society to the piece that represented them. That's the idea. And so when our founding fathers formed this country, they formed it under the Declaration of Independence, which was written by Thomas Jefferson. And I'm going to bring up a few concepts here, so it's going to be important to mention this, but we're not going to go into it too much on this podcast. We are going to cover it, though. When they wrote the Declaration, it intentionally made a statement that this was a nation that was formed in Christian beliefs. You hear a lot of people say, oh, it's not a Christian nation. Well, they're absolutely wrong. The Declaration actually states the name of the Creator in it. This isn't a religious talk. This is just, it ties into some things, some concepts that apply to the Supreme Court and other legal matters later in the concept of lateralism in society in general. So it's not going to be pushing your religion, but we're going to mention it. And so when they formed the country, when they wrote the Bill of Rights or the Declaration of Independence, they knew they were going to write something later, a Bill of Rights, and they knew they was going to form a constitution. It was already in their minds. It wasn't, and so in the Declaration, it states that all our rights are God-given and that government can't take them away. That's important. It's really important. People overlook this, but it's a huge fundamental, clue to the way our government should work and the philosophy of the founders. They all knew what the Declaration said. They all signed it. They all agreed to it. There was no dispute about it. There was a shorter version that was signed just before, the day before, or 4 days before. But it didn't reject any of the concepts that are in the Bill of Rights. It was just a lot shorter. So there was never a dispute about that, right? All the founders, besides Thomas Paine, were Christians. I mean, you hear people say, "Oh, well, they're deists." Well, this kind of talk never even existed until the internet was invented. But even if they were deists, and they weren't, they could still be Christians. And this is the thing that was so different in their time. If I'd have made the statement I just made then, they wouldn't agree with me. There's going to be a lot of Christians who don't agree with me right now too, and that's fine. That's not something they could have stated, just come out and said. Thomas Paine was living a dangerous life, being it out as he was. He was an atheist and sort of an anarchist. He's the libertarian's dream in a lot of ways, modern libertarianism. He wrote a pamphlet called Common Sense, I think it was. Maybe that was Ben Franklin. Anyways, he wrote some pamphlets for, saying that the government shouldn't have influence. And this guy was really not liked by the other founders, but because he was an atheist. But he had his message resounded through what they were trying to do. And so when they wrote the Constitution, they put in the Bill of Rights, this is what government cannot restrict. It's a concept that's different in any other contract law. Normally in a contract, anything that's vague favors the person that has something to lose in the contract. And so our Constitution is actually kind of difficult to understand. And modern scholars have lost sight of this. Basically, what our Constitution says is we're going to give the government certain rights. We're going to allow them to do certain things. And we're going to spell that out. And then they can't make any laws that extend their powers past these explicitly giving designations, and nothing they do can violate anything that's in the Bill of Rights. So there's always an and there, right? And so, like when we talk about the First Amendment, it says that people have a right to express freedom of speech, and that is to meet peacefully. And peacefully is not what people do now. Screaming, throwing things, acting crazy is not a peaceful assembly. In the day of the founders, they probably would have shot you for that. A peaceful assembly means you sit down and you talk and you have a rational, logical discussion. And yeah, people might yell. I mean, they yelled then, they're going to yell now. But they don't allow things to get out of hand. I mean, they had the incidents then where they would throw fruit and things, but there was always a medium where they would actually sit down and talk. And it was almost always a church, by the way. Almost all government functions took place in churches in the time of the founders. And so they would sit down and they would have meetings and they would talk things out. That's the intent of the First Amendment. They always allow the media to be there. Even though our founders pretty much universally all hated the media, they believed that people had a right to know what was being discussed. That's why they believe the media should be there. They never intended for the media to influence people. They spoke out about it universally. And our media is controlling our politics today. So there's a huge problem. And as of yet, I haven't really worked out how to fix that in lateralism. It's one of the last sort of concepts I need to change in the ideology. I need to think of a way. But it turns out being really difficult in an information age. And so that's the key thing that I haven't worked out. But in the Founders Day, it was quite simple. They were relaying a message. And yeah, they could slide it, but, make it read the way they wanted. But the point is, it was still a relay of other people arguing. And they didn't control the conversation. But the biggest thing that they wanted in the First Amendment was protection of freedom, not from freedom, or from religion, I mean. You hear people say, oh, we're protected from religion. We absolutely are not protected from religion. There is no separation of state and church. It's a complete myth. We'll go into that in another podcast. I'll explain exactly why it's a myth. I'm not pushing religion. I don't want anybody, I don't want people going into the government and bringing with them their own personal concepts and ideas about religion and promoting laws based on their own concepts. But if they're representatives, they might have to represent religious ideas, which is why the Declaration is important. And so we're going to go into that. But the biggest thing is they didn't want a rehash of the Church of England. That was the big thing. We had a lot of Puritans. We had groups that were prosecuted. They were what we would call nowadays religious fundamentalists. They believed straight, no interpretation. They thought the Bible was literal. To my understanding, they didn't believe in metaphorical representations in the Bible. I'm not sure about that. But the point is that we had a lot of different views of Christianity. When they talk about freedom of religion in America, they're talking about Christianity. They're not talking about any other religion. And I don't have a problem with another religion. But the point is they were not talking about any other religion. The conversations that were taking place with the founders were about different denominations of Christianity. And it's important because when people argue, you always say, well, if we let Christianity in school, we got to let Muslims. We don't have to do anything. And this is where we're going with this conversation. Right? And this isn't about religion, but this is where we're headed. So when they created it, they set up these rights. So say that the government now says, I'm going to pass a law that says in order to be a member of the press, you have to be Jewish. All right. Well, they can't make that law because they haven't been given the explicit right to create laws restricting anything on media, period. And this concept eludes a lot of people. They can't extend their powers. They do it every day, but they legally can't do it. Constitutionally can't do it. And the Supreme Court justice was meant to stop them from this. The sole function of the Supreme Court justice is to stop anything that is either vague or unconstitutional. And the vague part is the part you've never heard. There is no such thing as interpreting the Constitution. It's not a thing. Interpretation in terms of the Constitution means change. And I had a person who's actually, I think, a constitutional scholar today, is a lawyer of some type, was arguing with me. It means change in terms of the Constitution. The reason why I say that is this. The Constitution is really clear. It's a really well-written document. And the thing about vaguely, what I was talking about a while ago is that about contracts, is that if you're going through the Constitution, right, the person who suffers to lose in all situations are the citizens. The government can never be on the losing side. So if there's something unclear, then it automatically defaults to what is unclear that favors the citizen. So if we look at religion, and the biggest one that easily stands out, and it can make a strong, conversation about today, is we had a thing come up about gay marriage, and they passed some state laws about it, and they were challenged, and the Supreme Court upheld them. So there's all kinds of things wrong with this, what I'm talking about right now. All right. Yeah, people are saying they can't comment. So we'll go through we'll go through that. Hang on. Sorry, people can't chat. Anyways, so we'll go through the issues with that. So the problem with gay marriage is one, right? This is what I was talking about, favors the public. The Supreme Court justice cannot make a ruling on religion, period. Period. They can't rule for or against. All they can do is make a ruling that says you can't make a law about religion because it restricts religion. And what I mean by that is when the state made a law saying that gay marriage, I guess, was illegal. I don't remember what state it was in. We'll say North Carolina, because I think that's right. But so we'll say North Carolina made a law. The state, North Carolina, made a law saying that you can't have same-sex marriages in North Carolina. The Supreme Court then came back and said that law was unconstitutional. Now, for the, a starter, the Supreme Court was wrong, right? That is completely constitutional for the states to make a law that says same-sex marriage cannot occur in their state. That is 100% legal. And the reason I say that is because there is a federal restriction against and any kind of, ruling or law on religion. But there is not a federal protected right to marriage. It's not protected for anyone. It's not in the Constitution. It was left out intentionally. And the reason is, amongst Christians, a marriage is a union between man and woman before God. It's a Christian principle. Doesn't matter if you agree with that or not. I'm not against gay marriage. I'm just saying that's what it says. And so the states then have the right to say, I don't like this Christian idea of marriage, or I do like it. They have that is reserved to them, a power reserved to them by the 10th Amendment. Everything that's not given to you, to the federal government in the Constitution, is a state's right. And this is the whole thing about us talking about republic versus democracy. In the modern form of republicanism, that's what it means. Everybody's equal partners, and then you have the federal government who can override a state if there's something that is designated in the Bill of Rights has been violated. It has to be in an amendment. All right. So there is no amendment about marriage. There is no mention of marriage anywhere in the Constitution. It's not a protected right. And so what the Supreme Court did is not only did they overstep their boundaries and make a ruling on marriage, which is explicitly forbidden by the First Amendment because it's a religious matter, and it's vague, which means it works in the favor of the population. Now, you might say, well, part of the population is the gay community who wants same-sex marriage, but they're the minority, right? This is why democracies are bad, but in this case, we have a democratic process, they lose, all right? So this is why it's important to understand these concepts. And so the Supreme Court justices don't have a right to make that ruling. That ruling in itself is unconstitutional and should be ignored by the states, and we're going to get to that in a process called nullification, and that's where we're going to go with this. And so the other problem with the ruling is that it created a special class of people who only those people now in the United States have a right to marriage, and that is same-sex marriage. So now, according to the Constitution, or an interpretation, which is legal for the Supreme Court to make any kind of interpretation, I'll explain that next, is that according to them, the Supreme Court that the Constitution says the only marriage legal in the United States now is same-sex marriage. That's what they've actually said, because there was no right to marriage for anyone before that. These things are a really, really important concept to understand. Now, you might say, well, it does. You could say that there is a right to marriage in the Constitution because it says the pursuit of happiness. No, it's not, because that's a religious ceremony, right? And the Supreme Court justice can't make interpretations for a reason. If something's unclear, then it automatically defaults that the people just get to have that right. There's nothing to clear up. So like if you're talking about the Second Amendment, which was actually intended for states to perform militias and protect themselves, right? Self-defense. But let's just say, there's a big concern with people nowadays is that personal self-defense is, because it says shall not be infringed, and it's talking about the right to bear arms, then it becomes a question, well, what do you want to bear the arms for? It's not a question. This is what I mean about the Bill of Rights. If it's a question mark, it's automatically okay. So when you say, well, what arms? What do you need them for? What do you have? All those questions are irrelevant. If it's vague, then they automatically have the right to do it. So in America, constitutionally, every single human being in this country, no matter if they've committed a crime or not, has a right to carry a gun on their person, open carry, anywhere they want, anytime they want. That is what the Constitution states. Any law that tries to infringe upon that right for any particular reason whatsoever is unconstitutional. And it's the Supreme Court justice's job to rule it unconstitutional. That's what they're there for. And so states can make a right. They can make a law about guns, but it will be unconstitutional. Right? I don't know if that's clear or not. And the reason is because it has been spelled out in the Constitution. This is a right. So states can make a right about marriage. They can make a law restricting marriage because it's not a spelled out defined right in the Constitution. And the Supreme Court can't do anything about it because it's a religious matter and it's not something they were granted power over. The Second Amendment, states can't make a right restricting gun ownership because it is, in fact, a spelled out right to own guns. And the Supreme Court don't have ability to overrule that or create law. This has been completely lost in modern society. They think that if they can come up with a witty, pedantic way to question the wording of the Constitution, that they can change the meaning. The Supreme Court just been doing this from day one. Thomas Jefferson himself spoke out about this and said how dysfunctional the Congress had come and how dysfunctional our government had become in less than 10 years. And, a lot of people say, well, this is originalist thinking. The founding fathers didn't mean this, so they didn't mean that. Many of the founding fathers were still alive when these things were changing. They definitely knew. There was actually people who fought in the War of Independence were still alive when these things were being changed. So there's no question they knew what they were talking about. They knew for a fact that the Supreme Court was doing things that violated the Constitution. The Supreme Court has been a complete design flaw in our society from the day it was created. And when I talk about dilution of power in lateralism, the Supreme Court needs to be diluted as well. It has to be done. It has to be fixed. If it doesn't get fixed, this state, it won't be long. I'll predict within 35 to 40 years, this nation will either be in a civil war again because of the way the last one ended, or they'll call a convention and nullify most of the Constitution. One of those two things has to happen because the Supreme Court justice is completely out of control. And that's why I want to talk about it today. We're talking about these appointments. They're saying, well, Kavanaugh appointments is completely irrelevant because the Supreme Court justices do not function within their role anymore. They now believe that they have the right to change the Constitution, to interpret it. Anyone who tells you that the Supreme Court's job is to interpret the Constitution does not know the point of the Constitution and cannot be a lateralist. They cannot prescribe to the belief system that I have. I'll say that on record right now because what you have to have in a society, and this is why we mention religion, is you have to have a few things. One thing you have to have is a moral code that is objective. It's ratified. It cannot be changed. It is the fundamental view, right? You can't alter it. Now, throughout time and all society, what we've seen is that the moral code came from a religion or several religions. Like, for example, in Rome, they had their own set of religions several times that changed, and then they switched to Christianity. Like, it was mostly a forced change, and it was rapid, and it devastated the nation in terms of morality, not because of the Christian morals were bad, but because they replaced morals that were ingrained into the people, and they still believed in them. And this is playing out today, not with Christianity being replaced with another religion, but it's being replaced with moral relativism, which we'll talk about, and that's not morality at all. And so morality is objective. It's defined, right? And when it comes to the Bible, we're going to have a different podcast about this. So maybe people who don't want to talk about straight religious, because one talk will have to be straight religious talk, just in reference to America. But in any religion, you'll have a moral law, which is a tenet of the religion. It's an ideological belief that cannot be broken, right? And then you have religious laws, which may or may not be based on the moral tenets, but they still are part of the religion. And an example of that would be kosher foods. Those they have to be done sort of their religious law, but it's not necessarily because of a religious belief. It's because of something that's been handed down, wisdom's handed down through the religion itself. And then sometimes you would just have religious values. And these are things that you would want to do. And the golden rule, as people often reply to, is not actually a moral. It's a religious value. So people don't have independent morals. And a lot of people are saying, oh, this guy's crazy. Morals are derivative, right? Anything you believe regarding wrong or right has derived to you. It came to you from a religion, whether you like it or not. You may say, I'm an atheist. Well, okay, fine. You're an atheist. You don't believe in a creator, but guess what? Your personal values, not morals, we need to learn as a society to use the word differently, but your personal values, because you now don't have a moral system because you're an atheist. And that's not to say you're a bad person. It's just to say you don't have a moral system. You have a value system. Your value system has determined, like, it's been ingrained upon you through generations, maybe not directly, maybe 3 generations back, but these concepts were given to you through Christianity if you're American. If your family's past history was American, European, what have you, right? And the reason I say that is because this is something I've thought about a lot. I've done a lot of research, contacted a lot of psychiatrists, including Jordan Peterson. This is not something half-baked. Like when man popped out, you imagine this. Let's just imagine like a caveman, right? And they formed society. They didn't just look at the world around them and know that killing people was wrong or raping was wrong. You can believe that if you want, but you're not right. All right? At some point, there was humans that were just like animals. In the animal kingdom, if an animal, a tiger, wants to kill an elk or something, it does it. It doesn't feel bad about it. It does it. It may do it for food. It may do it for protection. Maybe that tiger just feels like killing an elk that day. The point is that it will do it. And there's nothing about that to the tiger. There's no concept of right or wrong. It's just what he does. All right, this is important to understand. We're animals as well. So, when this tiger does this, he doesn't have remorse. Now, so like just to go around killing all these elk, to a human being in a modern world, you would be a psychopath, right? You just go around killing people for no reason, psychopath, right? And then to not have remorse about it, you'd be a sociopath. So these are clearly things we believe are wrong, but a tiger doesn't. Does that mean a tiger is wrong? I say no. That's up to you. The point is that we in America believe, the founding fathers believe, we derive our rights from natural rights, not to be confused with the scientific Darwinism later of natural rights. They're actually different. A lot of people get confused with that. A lot of people believe in a secular government. There's no such thing. We'll have that argument later. In fact, I hope that someone will come and try to debate me about that. And it can be anyone but Stephen Molyneux, because I think Stephen Molyneux kicked my ass no matter what he was debating me against. But it's another story. Stephen is welcome to come, but I don't believe there's such thing as a secular government. What I do believe is that you can look at your objective morality for a society, and you can make a bunch of laws that don't mention any form of Christian text or religious text, and you can call that secular. But the point is that those founding principles still came from ideological beliefs. Now, one thing that's been argued out, in the past, is that maybe humans didn't stop killing people and raping and things because they realized it wasn't productive. It's a valid argument. I don't have a problem with it. They formed a moral code. That's all that matters to me. I don't care how they did it. But the point is that we know through historical records there's never been a society without religion. So, my argument is that all the moral codes came to the religion, because one way or another, no matter how they formed them, that's what wound up happening. If you want to take a Darwinist, a scientific view of it instead of a theological view, and you say that mankind just adapted to their surroundings, decided killing each other was bad, raping each other was bad, and then they just made up a religion to project that image, that is how they codified their moral objectives. That's what a religious text does for you. It writes it down, and everyone can see it. It's agreed upon. There's no argument, and most importantly, there's no interpretation. This applies to religion as well, right? When you start interpreting, what you're really doing is changing, all right? And the reason why a lot of times, you say, well, no, people are interpreting it because they don't understand it. Every time we read something, we interpret. No, interpret it carries a very specific meaning. Interpret means that you read something and then you gather from that a conclusion. Well, people who are all taught the same moral base and the same religion to begin with would never draw a different conclusion from the same text. They wouldn't do it. Not in any significant way. All right. And even if they did, they'd be the minority, right? And I remember what I said about democracies. All societies work on a democratic process, basically, before they invented republics and forms of government like socialism. So, like in a village, it's democracy. So, yes, one person might look at a script that says, "Y'all shall not kill," and go, "Oh, does that mean we can't kill each other in war?" But if the rest of the village, just because it's been handed down, this objective code says, "Yes, you moron, we can kill in war to defend ourselves, but we don't kill each other out of," then that guy's voice is nullified. That's the way religion, that's the way objective morality works. I'm not saying it's necessarily right. I stated at the beginning of this, democracy's bad, but that's what it is. And so in America, we're a Christian nation. We have Christian morality. Even the atheists in this country have Christian morality, right? Until somebody forms a unified code of objectives written down that people agree to those objectives, and they use those codes and they use those objectively, then all your moral beliefs are based on a derivative of Christianity. The great philosopher Stephen Molyneux actually did write, I think it's called Universal Preferable Behavior. He started, I feel like he needs to add a lot to that, but I guess he doesn't feel that way. And I'm not anyone to question him, but I think if you're going to use it as a guiding sort of principle for life, then it needs to be more to it. That's something I would love to talk to Stephen about. But the point is, Stephen understood this point as well. And if you don't know who he is, you should check him out at Free Domain Radio. He's on YouTube as well, Stephen Molyneux. He's everywhere. Basically, he goes through all this. He's been doing this for I don't know how many years, way more than 10. And the concept is that if that you do derive everything over time, but you can sit down, as philosophers do and have tried to do, and make a code of morality that just doesn't have anything to do with creation or any kind of religious context. And that's fine. I personally have a problem with that, but it's just never happened. And Stephen started that. He started one. Or maybe he feels like he's finished. I don't know. I'd have to ask him that. But the point is that it hasn't been embraced by society yet. If there were a society based on his universal code of preferable behavior, I think it's called use. I can't remember. I'd have to look. But if there were a society formed on that, then everybody in society's morality would then, within a very short time, become derivative of that, which means they would, in fact, could be an atheist who had morality, but didn't believe in any kind of religious morals. That's true. It's a true statement. It's never happened, but it could happen. So right now, you can say to a person, if they're atheist, you're immoral, unless they can point to you a code that they've agreed with others at least. And they have a value system. Why does all this matter? It matters a lot. Because when questions like gay marriage, legalization of pot, anything, these all go back to our religious foundings. And so if you have a whole group of people who are arguing from a stance of moral relativism, which what that means is that you believe you get to make up morality as you go, that it's subjective. It's absolute insanity. But basically, if you look at the left spectrum of American politics today, and I don't want to put sort of like, so obviously not everyone fits into this right on the left, but we have a huge push for what I call modern socialism. And this is where the feminists come from. This is, pro-abortion. There's all sorts of things fall into this. But basically, they are pushing to remove the objective morality of society, to remove Christianity. They talk about secular rights. They talk about interpreting the Constitution, not being an originalist. Women's rights, and they'll apply the term to something that has nothing to do with rights. Like women's health right, reproductive rights. It doesn't have anything to do with rights. Right? All these things go against the objective moral code of society, which is fine, right? If you want to go against the code, that's fine. But you will, in fact, be immoral in your behavior. And so what we have is a socialist push to overturn the American ideology in America. This isn't what's caused me to form lateralism in America. I actually formed lateralism for Venezuela. It's really what was in my mind when this happened. But it's the same thing. It's a socialist push. And so when you see me talk about lateralism being anti-socialism, anti-globalism, anti a lot of things, this is why. What happens when you start bringing in socialist type ideologies into any society or a particular republic is that the shift from here's our objective morality, everybody knows what to do and what to expect and how to behave, continually slides to the left, we'll say in this case, away from that morality. It can never return. So every single compromise that's made at any point, anywhere, leads you away from morality. And it erodes a little bit of your society because now people are unclear or in conflict without resolution about what they believe in. And so the further you move away from that morality, the worse conditions get until society collapses. And this is what we're seeing right now. This is why so many people turn on the church. People say, I don't go to church because the church is sexist or the church is treated me bad, right? That's not why people are leaving church. This may be a definitive truth for their character, their person, right? But it is not the real reason why they're leaving, right? You can't look at objective religion that has always been the objective religion for your society and claim it as sexist, and now you can't follow it and maintain your morality. Sorry, or you can't. I mean, is it true that Christianity is sexist? I mean, yeah. Everything's sexist. The world's sexist. There's two sexes and people are sexist. That's just the way it is. I mean, what you have to do is you have to create a reality. You have to create an ideology that embraces and pursues a way so that it doesn't matter that people are sexist, that everybody's still okay and everybody's happy. You have to do what makes people happy. Right? And so just to claim everything's sexist, we have a right to this, right? It's just eroding society with no just cause. And so this brings up two things, right? Well, it brings up 2 points I'm going to talk about, but I'm going to show you an example first of where this sort of understanding morality and states' rights and all that comes into play. So right now, we have a situation in America where sort of the right, the conservative sort of America, doesn't want to allow gay marriage. At least some parts of it are that way, right? And they've written some laws, and they've been overturned by the Constitution, by the Supreme Court. But the point is they were trying to stop same-sex marriage in their states. All right, and I've already told you that the Supreme Court doesn't have any right to rule on that. But we're going to get to that. So anyways, they tried to stop same-sex marriage in their states. And the way you stop something that a federal government does, that if they didn't have the power to do it, is you use what's called nullification. You basically just say, you don't have the authority to do that. I'm going to do what I want anyways, right? And a whole lot of that should be going on. And an example of where that is actually going on is on the other side of the spectrum. It's generally considered a sort of a leftist ideological change, although it's not necessarily leftist. is the legalization of pot in states like California or marijuana. And California, Seattle, not Washington, not Seattle, and California. And so basically what they've said is that we don't accept your authority, Washington, D.C., we don't accept your federal authority to make laws criminalizing marijuana because it's not in the Constitution. You wasn't given that right. And so they've just said it, we're nullifying your federal authority and we're making it legal. And the Supreme Court justice allowed this. Now, this is very problematic because what's now happened is that they've made laws that affects everyone in the United States, and the Supreme Court justice did nothing about it. All right, and it violates the federal laws. Now, here's what I'm going to say about that. They were right to make those laws and nullify the federal law because the federal government did, in fact, not have any power to make that law to begin with. But why it becomes important to talk about is because when they nullified pot, they got away with it. But when the different individual states tried to nullify same-sex marriage laws, which also the federal government doesn't have a right to create or rule on, they were denied by the Supreme Court. And they've used federal powers that never should have existed to exert force upon them. And they've even put people in jail for not upholding these federal laws that are unconstitutional. All right. So this is a huge problem. And this is actually how the Civil War started. People talk about slavery. It was not slavery. It was the inability to nullify federal overreach that caused the Civil War. I understand that slavery was a catalyst. It was an economic factor, but it is not that which caused the Civil War. The states always had a right to relieve the Union, absolute right to leave the Union, because it was just an equal shared power. All right, they always had the complete control over their own citizens, always. They never gave up that right. And so in the South, despite what people want to hear, the South were actually on the right side of morality. Were they in the right to hold slaves? No, because they were violating personal liberty. That's not actually what they were fighting for. They had already been an abolitionist movement all through the South, but they were economically tied so much to the northern rich elites that had set up the plantations and then set up the factories in the North to use that same production, the cotton and what have you, in their production plants, that there was no way to separate away from it. It was a huge argument, but the moral founding in the middle is where the divide happened. So as we know, they fought the Civil War. The South lost states' rights, and basically the Constitution lost all meaning after the Civil War. That's the truth. And the reason is because states no longer had equal right to the federal government. And we became a Roman Republic instead of an Enlightenment Republic. And when that happened, the entire moral focus and the actual ideology of this country shifted in a way that could never be repaired. And so from the Civil War to today, we've just been continually going further and further and left, which brings us more and more into immorality and more into confusion. And so as that's happened, church presence is broke down. People have started questioning objective morality and trying to argue that it needs to reflect modern ways and call you a fundamentalist if you don't. But the reality is, just like the Constitution, it's not up for argument. Everybody should be a fundamentalist when it comes to the Bible or a religion, any religion. They just shouldn't act in extreme ways. See, this is the thing. When people talk about fundamentalism, they want to imply extreme behavior. That doesn't have to be the case at all. You know, if you were to take religious laws, they can change. That's fine. But moral tenets cannot. And so like the Ten Commandments are a set of moral tenets. They should never be violated. Some of them are absolutely violated by our society. They weren't. When this society was first formed, those 10 moral commandments were, in fact, the foundation of our legal code, despite what people argue. It can be proven easily. All 10 of the commandments, as they apply to our society, were, in fact, in the legal framework. You say, well, some things weren't as you would understand it. But the point is, in terms of property rights or personal liberty and freedom, they were all protected. And so as those changed, other things changed. Well, those were objective things that should have never changed. And so this is why people now have gotten, it's mostly young women, have got to the point where they think the church is evil. It's, too restrictive, of their personal freedom and maybe that's true. But the point is, it's our moral code. And so you have to ask yourself, are they better off without our moral objectives of society? And the answer is going to be, whether you like it or not, absolutely not. Because as society breaks down, society is designed in a way to protect women. It always has been. You see the feminists will argue that, but it has always been an arrangement that society protects women, and in return, women agree to bond themselves into marriage and select one single reproduction partner and raise their own mental community where they are the leader of raising the spiritual and ideological belief of the family. And the father is there to provide protection and be the head of the family, because in a time of danger or conflict, somebody has to be able to say, I'm the one in charge. And that's been the traditional way. It's always been set up, and that's the way it should work in all societies. And this is in lateralism. This is a concept. It's a concept a lot of people won't subscribe, to traditional life, but it is the way that it should be. And if you want to be happy in your life, it's the way that it ought to be. It's been proven comprehensively that women are most psychologically suited to being a mother and raising a household. Does that mean you have to do that? No, I don't. I don't care what individual people do, right? When I talk, I'm a macro philosopher, economic. I don't care what individuals do, right? If you're a woman and like my wife's working right now, I'm not working. So at the moment, that's not been that we flip back and forth. It's just something we do. But the point is that it's very non-traditional the way I live right now. But my wife has a career that she likes going to work. But it causes a huge amount of stress. And this is kind of an example of what I'm talking about, because she still feels this obligation to be in charge of the house, raise kids. Now, part of that's because I kind of suck at being a stay-at-home dad. And, that's because I'm also conditioned not to do that very well. So that her stress has a lot to do with my failings. But at the same time, if we weren't psychologically conditioned and morally conditioned through derivative ideas, this wouldn't be an issue. For starters, I probably would be better. I probably would do what I'm supposed to do, just automatically, do what I need to do to pick up her slack. And the other thing, she wouldn't worry about it. And this is what I'm talking about. So it doesn't work great for us, our arrangement right now. It works a lot better when I'm at work, or it works best when I'm at work and she's not, is the way it's always worked in our marriage best. But we don't do that too often, because she likes to be in the corporate world, and I kind of like to be, home. I always work from home. I work in computer and security and lots of things, so I tend to work from home anyways, but I'd just rather be here. But it's a perfect example of how it fails you. Well, when you take it out further, and then you start talking about things like abortion, then it really complicates. Now, I'm not going to go into abortion tonight, because it's a hyper complex situation. Not only from view of a religious, like sort of a Christianity perspective, and all the other religions. There's a whole bunch to the abortion issue. But the thing about it is that it is a marker in my mind, in a society, when suddenly one half of society, or a big part of society, that thinks it's okay to have abortions, which is debatably, it's indebatable in my mind, and I can prove that, or at least back that up, I'll say. It's a form of killing a life, taking a life, that one part of society believes is okay and the other doesn't. That is a monumental, step in a society when they get to a point where they're arguing about something as fundamental as killing someone or not killing them, as the case will be. And these kind of these conflicts are impossible to resolve once the nation's lost their morality. And this is why countries fall. So abortion will be part of the reason why America collapses. And you already see the division from it. I will just say right now, as it stands, going by our legal customs, and I've actually made this argument, a legal, logical argument on the internet. As far as Supreme Court justice goes, the only reasonable conclusion they could draw is that it would have to be illegal from a federal stance. Because, and without going into it like too much, it's, in this situation, the burden of doubt is the thing sentient or not, and you always err in the favor of the plaintiff, or not the plaintiff, the defendant, and this will be the baby in this case. So, they came to a conclusion that they've came to before. They did the same thing in declaring that Black Americans were not human beings. It's the exact same decision. They didn't know, or I don't know how they didn't know, but they questioned it anyways. They pretended like they didn't know, I guess we should say. They pretended like they didn't know blacks were humans. And so that was their argument. Well, they're not human beings. We can do whatever we want to. Well, this is what's happening it's the exact same thing that's happening in abortion, is the Supreme Court and most of the left are arguing, well, we don't know that it's human being, so we can do what we want. Well, no, that's not how our legal system works. And so this is going to be a pillar that's going to collapse the country eventually, if it's not resolved. And like I said, there's never been a case of a shift back to the right toward morality. It's never happened. Will America be the first ever to do so? I seriously doubt it, but it might. So that's how countries evolve, pinnacle, plateau, and collapse, is because it's all around morality. And the reason is because property and possessions don't mean anything, not in the long run. I mean, when you look at the ancient Egyptians, for example, what do we remember about them? Nothing, actually. We remember about their religion because there's religious monuments and they were left behind, and it marks their society. But the truth is, besides some written records about how they traded and things, we don't know how or where or anything, how the average Egyptian lived. Now, I mean, I know archaeologists probably know a great deal about this, but the average person doesn't. And the reason is because there's nothing left to talk about. I mean, it's all just a repetition. It's like they might have had one style of house, but the bottom line is they still sought out, protection from the environment. They made a house and they lived in it. It's like, it doesn't matter if it looks like a house in the Orient or does it, or one in a wigwam. It doesn't make any difference. The point is they had one. Those things don't matter. But yet, as you move to the left, that's what becomes the focus. Everything becomes about the individual. And this is the problem with leftists and sociology in a bigger picture, is that sort of like conservatives, for example, social conservatives, their entire view or belief system is protecting the objective moral code of the society. And they're doing so for the better good of society. They're trying to stop it from hitting the point of collapse. They understand morality and society and philosophy at a higher level than the people to the left. Now, people to the left will be offended by this thing, but it's true, right? They understand the collective better, and they try to protect that. And that's what draws them to do everything. And so you say, oh, well, they're evil. Whatever. They don't, I don't know some of the charges are, because the left's gone kind of crazy just right here under Trump, right? He just pushes their buttons, and it's made him act a little bit more fanatical than always. So it's hard to keep up. But I mean, basically the charges would be things like, well, the right doesn't care about gays because of same-sex marriage. It's not true that they don't care. Well, in some cases it might be true. There's always extremists. But I'm just, in general, the conservatives do care. But they also care about society. And so they place the needs of the many over the needs of the few. And that's the way they work. And that's a democratic process in a republic. And that's the way it's meant to work. But is this bad for the few, the people who want same-sex marriage? Well, it is. And so, the conservatives don't resolve that issue. It's just, well, it's tough, right? That's the way they view it. And so it's a little bit of a hard edge there, right? And so that's why it's always good to have both sides. You have to have balance in the world. It's something, lateralism is all about balance. That's the whole point of it. And so the people on the left, right, they're saying, that the conservatives don't have a heart. Well, what it is because they look at everything from an individual perspective. And they say they don't care what it does to society. They don't even understand. This is what I mean by it. It's a bigger perspective, is that they don't actually understand. I mean, if you tell a liberal that, it's very offensive to them, like probably an intellectual who's liberal, but it's true. They don't understand the ramifications of moral implications of society as well as people on the right, conservatives, like on the ideal spectrum. And the reason is because they view everything from an individualist perspective. That's how the two become different. And so they can't look past the fact that people who want same-sex marriage are not getting it, that something bad is being done to them in their perspective. They can't say it's good for society because we don't want to break down and collapse the moral code and the sanctity of marriage, which is actually one of the most fundamental pillars, one of the most fundamental institutions of a society. If you lose marriage, you will lose your society and it will collapse. And so the people on the right understand that. The people on the left don't. The left would often say, why does it matter to them? How does it hurt them, if them being the conservatives, if a gay person marries another gay person? They're just trying to be happy. That would be the question. And the answer is it doesn't hurt them on an individual basis immediately, right? But if you look past the individual and look to society, you will see that it does in fact hurt the moral fabric of society. Because the moral fabric of society, for example, in America, is that Christianity, or that marriage is a contract between God in front of man and woman, or in front of God. So, right, this is union. And it sounds like it wouldn't matter if that was gone, but it does matter, because what it does is it confuses it's a knockdown effect. Every single moral that breaks down is a knockdown effect. What you'll find, even if you're an atheist and an agnostic, and I really do recommend this, is that you should go and read every religious text you can. Because there's thousands and thousands of years of wisdom contained in those books. They're not just some random book. You know what I mean? It kills me when people dismiss like the Bible as a fairy tale. There's nothing, you couldn't make yourself look more ignorant than to make a comment like that, right? Because it's not just a fairy tale about some creator. I mean, the creator is like central theme throughout the book, but the entire book is a book of wisdoms and knowledge and histories, a lot of histories that are actually, proven to be true. Some that are maybe metaphorical, who knows? It may not be true. I don't know. It doesn't matter. The point is that these are what people believed in for thousands of years. This is how their societies were formed. And this is, like as an archaeologist, this is how you backtrack and find out things, right? So matters a lot, right? So if you understand the context of marriage and all the things that entails, then you understand how it affects society. If you don't, then to you it's just somebody getting their feelings hurt. Well, it's a lot more than that. And so I'm not against same-sex marriage, in case y'all want to know. My solution is that they should just change the law everywhere else. But this should be a state's right, by the way. This should be a state's decision. But the state should come to a compromise that they will make the marriage license the actual marriage binding contract in society. No hoopah, no wedding ceremony, nothing. Just when you get married, from now on, in any legal context, you are now married. No ceremony, no nothing necessary. And the reason for that is, it's just a legal account anyways. And this is the main thing that same-sex marriage people are arguing. You see a lot of things about them arguing that they want to have the ceremony. The number one main reason that people in same-sex marriages are arguing is so that legal documents, insurance, medical care, all these things that aren't rights at all, which this is part of how it knocks down on society. They're getting left out of these because their marriage is not recognized. And then the other side, the flip side is, to the human side of it, is that they want other people to see them as valid and that their relationship is valid. And the human side, right, is a side that everybody can relate to, including the conservatives, about what people think. Everybody feels, or, besides some really bigot people, everybody feels strongly that this is okay. Hang on, go back out. I'm doing my show. And so we can all agree the human side's fine, right? But we can't agree that the legal side's fine. And that's why I say we do a compromise, just the marriage certificate. And then the states should be able to make laws defining what marriage is in the moral sense, the society sense. So what we would do is we could make the marriage license called a civil union license. This is the language used throughout Rome. It's used a lot in Europe as well. UK uses that civil union. And so what they could do then is the states can make laws saying you can't get a marriage based on the civil union. It's still not as good for the human side, right? It leaves some gaping holes there. You know, it kind of just says, well, if say you had a really conservative state and they just said, no, man and woman, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, well, then yes, the human side of same-sex marriage has been violated, right? But it's not right. It's not right. I mean, you can argue that it's a pursuit of happiness, but it's not, because it falls under religion. And so, yes, they'll be unhappy, and I agree with it. I understand that, but the point is that they don't have a legal protection for that. And so, what you would hope to see in a republic, and this is why republics exist, is that not all states are going to be super conservative. And so, let's just use North Carolina example. I'm not picking North Carolina, but they've been really vocal in this one matter. They define, and they define marriage as a union between a man and a woman. And so they make that law in North Carolina, let's say, for our hypothetical situation. Well, now all the same-sex couples can't technically get married in North Carolina. I mean, they can legally get married, and it'll be valid in all 50 states, which is what federal laws are about. But they just can't have it recognized. Well, what I would say to same-sex married people is that you have a choice to make in this situation. And this is the way society is supposed to work, is you either live with the fact that the people here do not accept your decision, and you, not through the force of the state, not through use of violence, indirect, but you through philosophical means, sit down and have actual peaceful conversation with you. You convince them that there's nothing wrong with you. You just like the same sex. That's it, right? And you have to convince them and change their mind. Or ideally you would just leave and go to another state. There's plenty of states that would never define same-sex marriage as man and woman, or marriage as, different sex. They would just say it's fine. Same sex, different sex, whatever. It's a union, a loving union that binds two people together. It's kind of how they would define it, right? Like California, for example. And I think, that's what we got to get back to. None of this giant fight and argument, protest in the street every single time someone makes a decision. I mean, our society is completely dysfunctional right now. The only way we could be in a worse state is if we were in an actual physical civil war. We're already in a mental civil war, so the physical one's coming regardless. The only way we can stop it is to call a convention of states and to have some people come forward that have strong ideological beliefs, like lateralism, to argue for ways to modify our existing constitution or our state laws so that these problems are resolved. And this is the whole reason why I created lateralism. Like I said, I didn't create it for America, but it does work. There's some instances where I feel like maybe lateralism is probably, it's too extreme of a change. I don't like extremism. But it would resolve these problems. The biggest issue is that you have to convince people. You have to make people believe. It's like the legalization of pot. You have to convince whoever is against it, Christian or whatever, that it's okay, that it's just a plant, right? And that we're not trying to do anything crazy. It's been part of America, and there's all kinds of arguments you can make for it. Medical arguments. I mean, I think legalization against possession of anything is insanity. That's my own view, because our personal property, or all property, is protected under freedom in the Constitution, and our ability to choose to do things is protected under our personal liberty. The problem with the legalization of pot, of course, is the other side of the argument, is that we have socialized medicine, which we shouldn't have, which is another reason why I don't like socialism, and that we share the cost of our medical care, which we should not do. And so that's why there's an argument against marijuana, because, people can argue, well, you can't overdose on it. That's true, you cannot. Well, you can overdose on anything, but the problem is you're not going to overdose and die with pot, right? It's not going to do anything. It's just going to make you pass out. That's what's going to happen. But it will, in fact, cause you to get cancer and die. And I don't care what people are. I've gone to medical school. If you breathe in any form of smoke, it's going to kill you eventually. And these studies that say this is not true are just completely ridiculous, right? And all it is that's just an example of extreme confirmation bias in science, right? And that's why they created a Flat Earth Society, to make fun of these kind of people. And so, anyways, that's my thing about that. Is that we want to start thinking sort of, as a lateralist, we want to think of things. We want to think of the relationship as local. The authority levels is that local, county, state, then federal. We want to put it in that order instead of trying to have it handed down to us. And then on matters where we can't resolve it and it's outside morality, see, we need that outside morality needs to be part of the conversation. It never is. Then, okay, we make a law at the highest level because it doesn't hurt to do that, right? It doesn't violate anybody's morality. It just helps make things go easier, like kind of trade laws. So you can't charge a state tax for something that comes out of state, right? That's what the Constitution is supposed to be. That's the way founders wanted it. That's what an Enlightenment Republican looks like. And we actually have a clause, Article 4, Section 4, that guarantees a Republican form of government in the United States, which means socialism is actually illegal, which means people like Bernie Sanders technically can't be a senator. Just by saying he's a socialist and pushing for social ideas, he's violated his oath of office and automatically should be impeached. Anybody that's pushing for single payer automatically be impeached. And so this is the problem. We've come way too soft to the left. And this is why I say we'll never recover, is because we're so far now into immoral ideology that no one's willing to fight for what they believe in. And the reason is because they don't really believe in much anymore because they've come so far from morality. So anyways, that's my thought for you tonight. I hope that's a lot more exciting about just, hey, we're going to talk about this, that, and the other. I want to get guests on here. I want to get, people to debate. One of the comments is a spoiler reminder that King James and other versions says shall not kill is the actually infamous mistranslation that says thou shalt not murder. I actually know that. It is, in fact, that is true in the Ten Commandments. The commandment is you shall not murder, which is why you can go to war and kill people. But like I said, I don't want to get too religious. It kind of puts people off, and we're just talking about general liberal ideologies. I'm a lot of people don't know. I'm a Brother of Legion monastic, which means I'm a monk. I've started that myself. You can be assured that in the monastic content, we would talk about that. And there's going to be a podcast as well about thou shalt not kill in society, how it applies to abortion and everything else. But it's going to need, but that discussion is going to include theology. And one of the things I'll do is when I save these sessions, I'll actually save them. It'll give you the context of what they're. So if I ever have one that's going to be theological, it'll say that in the heading. And if that puts you off, then don't watch it. But I recommend, actually, even if you're atheist or agnostic, that you do watch, because one of the things that I think all people should endeavor to do is understand the actual morality, the objective morality of their society. If you don't do that, then you'll never truly understand your own culture. You won't understand your laws. You won't make sound political decisions. You'll vote for candidates that have no business running. And it's just rampant right now in the country. And so, the Constitution is so different than the way that the American kids are taught. Our schools don't teach it. They might as well not even teach the Constitution because they teach it completely wrong. And as our reader pointed out with spoiler alert, thou shalt not kill is not the difference as thou shalt not murder. And there's a lot of reasons that it ties into, but it has historical reference, that does, but it of course has theological reference as well, and it does apply to abortion. And I think we need to get back to having these real discussions, because we're sidetracked all the time by things like, did Kavanaugh sexually assault a woman? I don't give a rat's if he did or not, and that's not being, it's not a bad statement about her. I mean, I don't want anyone to get raped, but the point is, in the context that's being argued, I don't care. And the reason I don't care is because it's not a federal issue, right? So like you said, well, he's going to be Supreme Court justice for everyone. Yeah, he is. And if he did his job correctly, right, he would not be able to harm anyone with his decisions, because all he would be doing is nullifying bad decisions. And so this is the one thing that I told people. I mean, Kavanaugh could be the worst person in the world. It would not matter, right? If he understood our morality, if he understood our Constitution, he could not harm us if he acted within the parameters of that Constitution. So that's the sort of thing I'm arguing about, you know. I mean, we've got Ruth Ginsburg. She is a horrible person, right? But liberals think she's a great Supreme Court judge. She's terrible, right? She violates the Constitution and the principles of our beliefs in almost every single decision she's ever made. I mean, I've seldom seen her write or say anything that is consistent with our moral ideals in the country or in anywhere in the West. Yep, you know, so many women believe that what she's saying is great, and this is why we need to have the discussion. It's not that necessarily didn't need to change anyone's mind. It's just I need to make them understand, you know, that we need people to understand what they believe in. They can believe in whatever they want. So anyways, leave your comments. I'll definitely reply to them. You know, if you ever want to come on the show and talk, we can rehash any episode. I mean, this is brand new, so we got, you know, not a lot of followers yet. I got a lot of followers of Lateralism, but they just haven't found. They don't know I'm doing podcasts yet. I have about, I don't know, worldwide about 17,000 followers. They're pretty consistent. The monastic practice is up to like 2,000. So I mean, it's going all right. You know, but I'm not a public speaker, and you know, well, I do public speaking, but I don't do videos and stuff. It's all brand new, but you know, as we grow, it'll be nice to hear what people think, what they say. I mean, I've heard that I'm having problems with my chat. This was the last episode they said that, and it appears to be the same case again. I've got a friend that checked it for me. That's why I keep turning around, and she can't get into the chat. So I don't know. I'm going to have to find out what's going on with that. But, you know, I have a Facebook page, lateralism.org. I also have a personal one. I mean, I respond to direct messages. If you put it on lateralism.org, it's public. You know, my other page is a little bit more personal because I've had a lot of problem with dogs and people trying to confront me over lateralism. It's crazy, but it's the world we live in. So anyways, thanks, and I hope you tune in next time. And I think what we're going to talk about next time is we may go into Supreme Court decisions. I don't know. I'll have to see how it plays out. I kind of like try to stay similar to what's going on in society. But we might go into our basic income and just jump right in there and get started on the big thing, because that's always huge with the lateralist discussions. And the thing about it is that this part had to be discussed first, because it's fundamental in understanding why I want basic income to begin with. You know, trying to get rid of socialist programs, socialist ideas, and we're trying to limit the federal government. So that's what basic income's about. So I don't know, give it a thought. Update me, see what you think. Let's talk about whatever you want. Good night.